It's the Kyle Hyman Show on Redeemer Radio.
This is Kyle Hyman, and joining us is Michael Naughton, here to talk about his book, Getting Work Right, Labor and Leisure in a Fragmented World. Thanks for being here, Michael.
Yeah, it's a real pleasure. Thank you.
So this whole balance of labor versus leisure, I suppose one extreme would be workaholism, maybe the other extreme being laziness. Which do you think we tend to lean as a society?
Yeah, it's a good point. And in one sense, it depends where you're at, Kyle, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, on one level, if you think about it, we have two ditches we got to deal with. On one hand, we overrate work, and on the other ditch, we undervalue it. And so we overrate it, and in the book, I talk about this problem of careerism. We're trying to get more out of work than work can give us. And our whole identity is often kind of caught up into our achievements. And if you think about it, what's often the first question, particularly we Americans, will ask somebody, so what do you do, right? And so we're always keen about, well, what have you achieved, right? And so what does your resume look like? and a lot of us do this very, very subtly. My wife catches me all the time. She says, you're talking way too much about yourself. You're talking way too much about your achievements. So there's that one thing, because a lot of us like our work. We like to talk about it, and we tend to overinvest in it. On the other hand, we undervalue it. And some people, listen, my job, it's just a paycheck. It doesn't, I just go in there and I punch in the clock and I do what I need to do. And what they fail to realize is, of course, is God is in their work, and God wants something out of their work. They create a very small world in what the work they're doing. So I think both of them are a problem. I'm in the education realm. I deal a lot with business people, engineers, people in law. The career is the big problem. Mm-hmm. Those who are in dealing with more, and I don't want to simply say blue-collar worker, but those unskilled work often will kind of it's just a job. It's just let me just get through it. Let me win the lottery and I can stop working, for example.
So your book is called Getting Work Right. So do you get work right?
Well, depends on the day and depends if you're talking to my wife or not. Right? The thesis of the book is pretty simple. In order for us to get work right, we have to get leisure right. And sometimes, work gets the best of me. Like I was saying before, it demands a lot out of me. I sometimes do way too much. I'm kind of absorbed by it. And sometimes I'll neglect the spiritual life. I'll neglect the family life. I'll neglect those relationships that go on. And this is why the spiritual life is so critical. I mean, John Paul II wrote an encyclical letter in 1981, and the last chapter was called The Spirituality of Work. And that's why you got to pray about your work. You have to bring it to prayer. You have to bring it to all this reality, this kind of spiritual direction. And so it doesn't take over, that one doesn't get too fixated about it. And also that one opens one's eyes about where God is acting in that work, even though it has some real toil to it, as the scriptures tell us. Sure. Work is not going to be easy, and there's a certain kind of suffering that goes along with it.
Well, before we get into leisure, when we're talking about work, I suppose the two things would be what we do for work and how we do it. So how important do you think it is that we get the what right of what we're doing for work? Or how much of it doesn't matter what you're doing for work, just find some work and then do it well and do it the right way?
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's very few forms of work that in its very nature is objectionable. You think about pornography or prostitution or something like that. Okay, sure. There's nothing redeemable that's going to go on there. But for people who go into, whether it's manufacturing or fast food work or driving a bus, often it has a lot to do with the question about how one does that work. And one of the things about the tradition that really speaks well about it, it's always asking the question, what is the good that you're doing? Right? And so in the book, I talk about three goods of work: good goods, good work, and good wealth. And that the first one is, what's the good or service you're producing? And one has to be careful there, particularly as Catholics. We sometimes think, well, that means you're a teacher, you're a doctor, you're a social worker, you're a priest, you're a nun. You're doing humanitarian work. Well, humanitarian work is very important. I have a daughter working in Ghana right now with Catholic Relief Services. It's very important work. But you know what? We need people to make Actually, I'm on the board of a manufacturing company. I'm the chair of it, and we make hinges. The world needs hinges.
Sure.
You know, the world needs concrete, right? The world needs carpet. And so it takes a lot of goods and a lot of services to make this world go well. And, you know, there's something good about the fast food industry. And then there's there's some negative things about it as well.
Sure.
So there's often ambiguity to that. And then the second one is the good work. You know, are we utilizing the gifts of people? And third is good wealth. If you don't produce more than what you've been given, you die, right? So you need margin, you need profit. And profit's not a bad word. It's a necessary word, but it's a means, not an end. It's a good servant, it's a lousy master. So I think those are the three goods that people need to think about when they go to work. The challenge, of course, it's hard to do all three of them well all the time. And that, I think, is often the issue for a lot of people who go to work. How do I deal with all three of them? How do I serve the customer, serve the client, serve the student, serve my listeners, whoever they may be? How do I make sure that the work that I'm doing is utilizing the fullness of the gifts that I have? And to be quite frank, how do I do it in such a way that actually can make money, that can actually make margin? I think when people wrestle with those three goods, I think they're getting at what good work is about.
We're talking with Michael Naughton. The book is Getting Work Right, Labor and Leisure in a Fragmented World. You said all of this goes back to getting labor right, almost, I guess, before we go into work. In what ways do we get leisure wrong?
Yes, that's a great question. There's multiple reasons how we get leisure wrong. And I think the first one is that most of us have a tendency, and certainly the larger culture, will often look at leisure as amusement, right?
Okay.
And it's very interesting. The etymology of the word is very interesting. Amuse. And so the word comes from the Greek word muses. And the muses were the goddesses of the liberal arts. They were meant to refresh you. They were meant to help you see this larger horizon. But when you put the word in front of it, it negates it. And thus, if I'm a theist, I believe in God. If I'm an atheist, I don't believe in God.
Right.
Well, I remember I think it's in Wiktionary, and one of the definitions for amusement is to stare stupidly at something, right? Right.
Wow.
And this is my wife's description of me watching television, right? There's something about our amusements are to distract us, right? They help us to forget about life. You know, there's a great song by Billy Joel, The Piano Man. They know it's been me they've been coming to see to forget about life for a while.
Right.
Right? And so amusement deadens the soul instead of makes it come alive. This is why for a lot of us, when we go on vacation, we don't come back rested. We just we come back restless. Or when people watch hours of Netflix or they do hours of video games, there's no rest in it. You know, it's not to say that they're in and of itself, it's bad, but we tend to try to think that is what's going to give us a certain kind of satisfaction. And it actually deadens the soul. And so the question for us is, well, what leisure gives us a kind of deep rest? And that's why my other thesis in the book is that if we don't get Sunday right, we're not going to get Monday right. And I think at the heart of this thing is actually we have to get that first day of the week, which is actually Sunday. And Sunday is a day of rest. It's the Lord's Day. And again, for many Catholics, we tend to think of the Lord's Day as I to get my Sunday obligation in, and the rest of the day's mine. Which is why there's a psychologist, Sandra Ferenczi, used a very interesting term called the Sunday neurotic, the Sunday neurosis. Why is it that we tend to have a low grade depression, a certain kind of angst, a certain kind of anxiety, and it tends to happen on Sunday? And now some people think because you're going to go back to work on Monday, but actually for a lot of people, they don't know how to rest, and they try it, and it gets them in knots, and it just turns on them. So I do think this idea that we have to learn how to rest well, and in what that resting is, what does it mean? And key to it is going to be prayer, it's going to be worship, it's going to be time with family, it's going to be time with play, it's going to be time in nature, it's going to be, music, it's going to be all sorts of different things. It's not just going to be screen time or golf.
Yeah. This is great, and I'm sure there's a lot of things that are going to be helpful for adults who are already in the thick of things, saying, I know I'm doing something wrong, and this book is going to help them with it. What about for our children to raise them with the proper understanding of work and leisure, even from a young age, to hopefully head them off in the right direction before they get all confused by everything?
Yeah, that's a great question. And largely, I wrote the book, as you mentioned, largely for adults. But I have been doing a lot of work with teachers and with schools just on the nature of Catholic education, Christian education. And it does seem to me that the nature of the educational project is, I think, critical here. And this is why I think the revival of what some people call liberal arts education or classical education is critical. Augustine has this great line where he speaks about the importance of virtue, and he speaks about it as an order of love. And so how do we order our loves? And one of the challenges of education right now is we teach to the test, we teach to the scores, we teach to everyone, getting these students to go to the next step. And so already they get in their minds the career, right? And then education, which is interesting, the word, it actually is connected to leisure. In the Latin, the word for leisure is schola, which is where we get the word school. And school is to be a form of leisure. And of course, I heard you chuckle, and that's what my students do. My students kind of look at me and say, what are you talking about? They just think of school as just work.
Right.
And what we got to do is to make sure that the kind of education we're giving our kids, there's something about it that we want them to help them understand the love of the nature of knowledge itself for its own sake, not merely for its own instrumental end. And that's where I think we need to really rethink education. And not rethink it, actually. We stand on the shoulders of a 2,000-year-old tradition of education that has been trying to do that for over 2,000 years. And that's what we call liberal education or liberal arts education or classical education. So I think for young people, the key thing here will be actually the issue of education. But also, I would say for young people, it's also on Sunday, put the screens away, play games with your kids, go out and play sports with them, get your kids out into nature, right? All of these things help them to see a created order. And so I think that's, all the popes have been talking about this. Benedict has this great commentary on the book of Genesis, and my wife has been very keen on this one, particularly for our household, is that we have to have this deep sense of a created order, which gets at the question of wonder and awe. And what do kids get wonder and awe at? Nature. Get them in there and allow that kind of seeping in. And again, limit the screens. Technology is important. We know we have to teach people how to use technology, but right now kids are just overdone by it, and they've been so deformed by technology. I think that's one of the key problems that we have in our culture.
Well, I love this topic, and I think it's so important that we do have the right balance of work and leisure and the right understanding of what each of them are for. And so this book is going to be a great explanation of that, and I think it'll help a lot of people. Where can people get a copy of it?
You can get it at St. Paul's, or you can get it on Amazon, or pretty much, I think, anywhere online.
All right. Again, it's called Getting Work Right, Labor and Leisure in a Fragmented World. Michael Naughton, thank you so much for joining us and sharing with us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, Kyle, it's been a real pleasure, and God bless you.